I thought that I was going to be able to get away with making one video on Malenia and one video on Mikola, but I was a fool. There's too much content and there's too many side characters in both of these characters' storylines. So I'm probably going to have to make like a 3-part video series for each, which I know I'm going to laugh about later on because I'm sure that when I'm on like video 5 of Mikola's arc that I'm going to be like cringing looking back on this video. That is what it is. So last time on Dragon Ball Z, we talked about the philosophy of the Scarlet Aeonia and what it might represent. I talked about how Mikola has a lot in common visually with Western alchemy and a lot of its concepts, how Western alchemy was about the pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone, which would help somebody achieve unalloyed gold or pure gold, and also would help somebody achieve immortality and purification and can also cure any sickness. We know that Mikola was looking for a cure for their sister. We know that they're really similar to the conjunction child in alchemical symbolism, which is a child that is both masculine and feminine, with Mikola being, you know, a small boy, but Saint Trina being the goddess of sleep, potentially being Mikola's like spiritual self. So we have like this combination of entities. And then with Malenia, in Eastern alchemy, the goal of Eastern alchemy is very similar to Western alchemy in that it's looking for the golden elixir of life. And this elixir is also supposed to grant spiritual immortality or spiritual enlightenment, or can cure illnesses or allow for more knowledge to come from like the deep depths of the divine ocean and all this other stuff. Or I think that the elixir comes from the depths of the ocean. It's one of the two. But either way, there's this symbolism with 3 flowers blooming from you. And one of the flowers that has to bloom has to do with 5 aspects of the self. And we talked about the 5 aspects of the self being called the Shen, which is your spirit, and it has to do intrinsically with like how your spirit kind of like engages with aspects of your body or like your physical organs or whatever. And we talked about how Malenia has 5 sisters, Millicent being one of them. Millicent says she is representative of Malenia's willpower. One of the aspects of the Shen does have to do with willpower. We talked about all this. We talked about flowers blooming above rot. We talked about how this is prevalent in Buddhism and all this other stuff. However, I didn't talk about the costume design of the characters, specifically of Malenia and of people like in her peripheral. So I didn't talk about the Wandering Blue Swordsman, the Blind Swordsman. I didn't talk about Valkyries. I didn't talk about her mother. I didn't talk about mudras. I didn't talk about a lot of things because there's just too much. I feel like when I pull out a thread, I can make like 50 subsequent videos about all the characters that each person touches, which is cool because it shows really like how complex and interdependent the writing is, but it's hard because trying to explain it is fucking insane and it's difficult. So even though this video is about Malenia, this video is really going to be about Renna, and you'll see why in a second. But we're going to talk about the Blue Swordsman and the inspiration for them, specifically like the Blue Swordsman's culture. There is, this culture was requested by Kosmos. Kosmos wanted me to elaborate more because they felt that the Tuareg culture has a lot to do with like the movement, the migration part of Tuareg culture has a lot to do with finding clean bodies of water or flowing water. And they have like a bunch of different spiritual practices and like cultural stuff from their indigenous kind of like history, but currently in you know, in modern times and kind of like modern history, they are Muslim, but because they're nomadic, they relocate based on drinkable water sources, and it influenced like kind of this migration pattern, being exposed to other cultures and you know, like moving around definitely influenced their branch of Islam. So they have like a very unique like spirituality in that regard, but they are Muslim. So the fact that we have this Wandering Blue Swordsman that you know, has echoes of this culture because they have like the indigo blue dye and they're seen as like the blue nomads or like whatever. They also have like the same kind of curved swords and stuff that are being used. You know, we have like a pretty clear distinction of them being from North Africa. You know, there's all this really cool stuff in regard to them. But what I was trying to get get at in the video is that we have, you know, a nomad who is teaching like effectively like a West Roman person with Scandinavian, you know, tribal heritage to some degree. She has like the Valkyrie aesthetic and like, you know, really embraces that part of herself. But she also is kind of like trying to bring back her belief system to paganism. So by the time that her and Mikola decide that they want to leave the Golden Order, Radagon has already kind of changed the sigil of the Golden Order to be just like the triangles. The Golden Order seal has gotten rid of the tree as like a part of the main faith. It's no longer there. It's no longer visible. So it went from looking kind of like this to the Celtic cross to just the like triangles with the circles. But then the Halig tree has the double helix with like the tree in the center, which is very much the piece of the Elden Ring that was missing from Radagon and Marika's version or iteration of the Elden Ring. So they're kind of like reverting back to this idea of the natural world and hermetic balance within the Elden Ring. And I'm actually going to make a whole video specifically on this and the Greater Will another time, because I have too much stuff, and especially, you know, with Gold Mask, I want to be able to do him service. So there's a lot going on with all this, and I want to talk about that in a second. There's too much. But first, let's tackle Renna. Which is like, what the fuck does Renna have to do with Malenia or the Wandering Swordsman? Well, we'll get to that. Stick with me. So Renna is hinted to be the Snowy Crone. So in a lot of the different item descriptions, it talks about how Ranni was taught by an old witch known as the Snowy Crone. And she encountered her deep in the woods. She was a witch well versed in cold sorceries. It said that the doll that houses Ranni was modeled after her. We also find that the Snowy Crone taught Ranni about the Dark Moon, and that there's like all the different ice spells that talk about the Snowy Crone, and you know how she is associated with mist and frost and all these different things. But more importantly, she's associated with spirits. In fact, when Ranni first meets us, she introduces herself as Renna, and she gives us the spirit collar bell. So we have this association with spirits, with mist and with snow. But we also find inside of Renna's Rise the Snowy Witch set, and there's a teleporter that takes us to the Ironcell River Well. This is very important. I'm going to talk about why, but first I want to talk about the Snowy Crone in real world mythology, because there is a Snowy Crone in real world mythology, both in Celtic and Nordic myth. But depending on which legend you look at, she's known as the Snowy Crone or the Winter Hag, a goddess of good or evil which shapes the land and controls the very forces of nature. She has many guises and names. She's the death goddess, a wise woman, Hel, which is associated with the underside of the world tree, which I'll get to, Valkyrie, Lady of the Beast, Hag of the Mist, Harsh Spirit of the Winter. So remember this one specifically. Specifically the Hel one. Death Goddess is also quite important. To hint, wink, wink, hint. It's my really bad wink. So we're gonna look at all this. So anyway, we find out about the Snowy Crone. We find her armor in Renna's Rise, and when we teleport down using the teleporter in Renna's Rise, we end up in the Ironcell River Well. So the Ironcell River Well is really interesting. It is supposed to be the depiction of the underside of the Erd Tree, or Yggdrasil in Nordic myth. And this whole series of like underground river wells has a lot of shared like symbolism with Elden Ring. So for example, in Niflheim, there is like the evil dragon Nidhogg that chews at the roots of the world tree, but in Elden Ring, instead of it just being Nidhogg, it's Godwyn's corpse that is actually contaminating the roots of the Erd Tree, and inside of his corpse is the friend, like his friend who was a dragon who tried to save him. So that friend, Fortisax, ends up becoming cursed and is effectively contributing to like inadvertently, accidentally contributing to this spread of rot simply just by being affiliated with Godwyn, by being stuck inside of him. You know, there's this like imagery of Nidhogg being evoked there, but Nidhogg had the intention of hurting the tree. It kind of seems like Fortisax had the intention of saving his friend, you know? So it's like a different, it's like he takes stories that we're familiar with and he just like changes them or alters them. I talked a little bit about how, you know, Marika is really similar to both Loki, the trickster god, and also Freya, Odin's wife. I talked about that in another video, but I might talk about it a little bit now actually, but whatever. So the underside of the Erdtree would be Hell, and there's like different realms. Hell is in one of the realms, but the fucking whatever. There's oracles that live at the base of the Yggdrasil, and they try to like hang out by the river, the flowing water, and sure enough we have the Clayman that blow little bubbles and are like acting like oracles. We have three sisters, likely being in reference to the Norns or the three fates. There's like a lot of different little like nods, like a little tip of the hat of different mythologies, like I always mention in my other videos, but it's like a mixture. It's like Miyazaki put all of these different things in a blender. So we have Renna, who, you know, goes down to Ioncell, the Undercity, or like what would be the equivalent of like the spirit world in Nordic mythology. However, something interesting is going on here. So I was like, why the fuck does Renna care about this place? Like, she's topside, she's up by the Carrion royal family. Why does she care about this like flowing river? Well, Renna, the name Renna means to melt. So it's referring to a freshwater source of melting water that is coming from like a glacier or like an ice cap. So we have melting, running, flowing water, and then we have a visible dam that's been built to separate the Ioncell River flowing water source from this stagnant water source that's rotting and could contaminate a drinkable water source. Specifically, the god of rot, like, who was sealed away, sealed her. She was sealed away, he was sealed away, I don't know, he was a scorpion? I don't know. You can find a vestige of the god or goddess of rot right here in the Grand Cloister in front of a little mushroom statue of Elden John. There's two Elden Johns right here. Elden John was just down with all the different outer god concepts. He didn't discriminate. Not only was he apparently in support of the Grand Cloister, but he also, you know, like his ritual chambers are used by the ancestral followers and also by Moog and also by all these different concepts. So it just seems like there's a lot going on with you know, Elden John's, you know, visage poking up everywhere. He's fucking everywhere, dude. Like, he just likes to have his little tootsies and everything. I don't know. You've seen his razzle dazzle, his little leg that comes out of his cloak. He's just like, I'm here, ladies. But anyway, what am I saying? I'm saying that the Blind Swordsman, the one that's inspired by Tuareg culture, is kind of like intersecting with Renna's storyline quite a bit. So I don't, you know, like I can't say 100% for sure that it was Renna who was the blue fairy, and like the visual representation of her is simply through the eyes of a Tuareg nomad. So like obviously she would have features that would represent, you know, him and his culture. But like, it's interesting because some of the stuff that she's teaching him is stuff that Ranni is taking up, and Ranni is constantly posing in mudras and is talking about how she needs to go take the order far away so that way it can be like physically kept like distant from us, so that way it doesn't influence our world in the same way that it did before. But her pursuit is going to cause her to live in a situation of like pure isolation, and that's very much like a Buddhist like concept as well. She's going to be like isolated. She's going to be, you know, going to go kind of like into this, you know, kind of state of being where she has to face isolation and fear and like the unknowing, and she just simply has to exist and remain grounded during this like whole little side mission. So it's cool that she's like posing or meditating in a lot of ways that should help her think clearly and be grounded. And even when she's faced with the death of Blythe and EG's death and she's like distraught, she tries to remain very calm in her words when she's talking about mourning them. And it's like it's very like sad. It's very sad to me. So it's interesting that she has like these forearms similar to the Fool's Idol in Demon Souls and similar to the Sculptor's Idols in Sekiro, because like the Sekiro one is based off of actual statues and they don't have forearms. Obviously forearms are related to a lot of Eastern symbolism and philosophy, and it makes sense that the Fool's Idol, you know, as like a king who is wrapped in like a Eastern robe but has like a crown of thorns and is like depicted with a lot of Western iconography, specifically like the rose window, which is like a spiritual enlightenment symbol. It's really cool to see this marriage of both Western and Eastern enlightenment and the different ways in which it manifests. So we have, you know, forearms holding objects that have to do with enlightenment or primal energies or whatever. So we just have like a lot of neat stuff. But it definitely makes me wonder about whether or not Renna was the blue fairy, and whether a lot of the spiritual enlightenment about still water and flowing water with Malenia's conclusions about her space in nature, her role as the goddess of rot, like the acceptance of that. She like destroys the needle and or I guess like Millicent destroys the needle. There's this like letting go of the self that's occurring. And I feel like it's kind of this marriage between, you know, there's the flowing water that's important to the Tuareg and important to like Renna, but there's this acceptance of nature and this embodiment of nature that Renna also has, because she's almost like this personification of snow and death and flowing water. But this is all like, you know, this is all educated guesses based off of like a lot of the artistic elements in the game and the placement of the items in the game, like the very deliberate placements of the items. So kind of like where I've been going with a lot of things. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Malenia's Western influences now, specifically the Valkyries. Obviously, most of you know that she's the Scarlet Valkyrie, which are beings who are supposed to guide the dead to Valhalla. That's not present in Malenia's story necessarily in a figurative sense. You can say that, like trees or plant life that is rotting needs to be shifted over, and like there's like an entropy, a process of entropy that's occurring that could be kind of like alluding to this process of guiding the dead. But something really cool that is like super interesting about Valhalla is that Odin, like warriors that like died or lived warrior deaths, would go to Valhalla. So that's really similar to the concept of Helfin in Elden Ring. So, and I talked about this before in Bati, and I have spoken about it in the past before too. It was referenced in, I think, one of his videos, but it's really cool because Glacier, there's like a tree that's outside of Valhalla that has red leaves, and it's called Foliage Red Gold, which is cool because the Crucible tree that Godfrey kind of like had a lot to do with was called Primordial Gold. So there's like this red gold, and there's this relationship with almost like animistic worship and returning to polytheism that's present in Malenia and Miquella's storyline. I don't know if I talked about it in this recording. Sorry if this is a repeat. I've been like trying to record this video nonstop, but obviously the Elden Ring's sigil, I don't know if it's here. Yeah, it is. The Elden Ring sigil used to look like a tree. It used to look like a tree, and then it kind of turns into a Celtic cross. So here's like the original one. it kind of turns into a Celtic cross, and then the third iteration of it is like moving away from any kind of representation of like this tree symbol into something that is just like a internal philosophy. And it's kind of funny because like when Mikola and Malenia abandon the will of the Golden Order and they make their own order, it is a sigil going back to the tree. And the tree has a double helix sigil, which represents like the marriage of polar opposites. So if Mikola is purification and rebirth and abundance, Malenia would be rot and decay and death. And these two concepts are married through each other. And it was actually what is missing. So this is the original Elden Ring that's in Farum Azula. It is a concept that was originally missing from Queen Marika and Radagon's version of the Elden Ring after she like fucked with it. And I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about the nature of the Elden Ring as a concept, and also the Greater Will as a concept, and the double helix in another video. And that's going to be my gold mask video. I might do that before my Mikola one, because I feel like that's super important for understanding the metaphysics and like the mechanics in the Elden Ring world. So yeah. Woo! I think I did it. Did I talk about... Oh yeah! So anyway, Odin was supposed to take the people of Valhalla, and Freya, who's the goddess of gold, receives the other half of the warriors into her world. And then there's a third death, that's Hell, the misty underworld beneath the world tree, and this is supposed to be where Hell resides. Hell resides. So this would be... Hell would be like almost like the Snowy Crone in some degree. Freya would be like Marika, although like I mentioned before, I also think Marika is like kind of a mixture of Freya and Loki in a lot of ways. But I need to make a Marika video in order to talk about like her kind of like cultural references and stuff like that. So yeah, there is a lot of shit. There's a lot of shit in the game. We're going to talk about science in the next episode. I'm going to talk about Malenia and entropy and rot and what it all means. What is rot and what's the importance of rot and death in nature? And I'm actually going to have a biologist come in on my podcast, my show. I don't know what this is. I have a friend who's a biologist, and he's really cool. We talk about antlions a lot, and like bugs and really neat things. And I wanted to have them on as like a guest speaker to talk about rot and entropy and all the concepts that Malenia embodies, because there's a general aversion that people have to scarlet rot. And I want to talk about like scarlet cups and about all that stuff, and about like chaos and order. And it's going to be fun. So look forward to that video. I'm going to record it tomorrow, probably. Yeah. Okay, bye.